Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This week we are taking just a little break from the Met Gala series to discuss a theory that I found that I was really interested in, just kind of wanted to do a little bit more research in. So today we are discussing the Hemline Index theory. So I found this on TikTok. I'd never really heard of it before, and I just decided, that actually sounds kind of interesting. Let me have a deep dive into it, see what I can find. There wasn't a huge amount of information on TikTok. Everyone kept kind of regurgitating kind of the same thing over and over and over again. So I decided let's have a proper look into this, and let's see what else there is to this. With my biggest question being, is it actually true? So first of all, we really need to answer the question, what is the Hemline Index theory? So economist George Taylor is credited with inventing it during the 1920s. And what it really boils down to is that the length of skirts is tied to how well the economy is doing. So a shorter skirt typically means good economy, and a longer skirt would mean bad economy. During 2010, off the back of the research done by George Taylor, Dutch economist Marlijn van Baardewyk carried out her own analysis into whether it was true or not, looking specifically at 1921 to 2009. And she found that hemlines typically rose 3 years before a uprise in the economy, and then would lower about 3 years before a downfall in the economy. So what evidence do we have to kind of back this? So we first start to see this take shape during the 1920s. We were just coming off the back of World War One, and alongside the good economy, the economy picking up again after World War One, we saw women go from the long skirts, the bustles, to the flapper style, getting a complete change in style to shorter hemlines. I will say there is a little bit of a discrepancy in what people believe was the flapper style. A lot of people visualize kind of like really short skirts. They were actually probably about calf length, and they were kind of that very boyish style with no shaping, but lots of kind of embellishment. But this was a huge change in comparison to the 1910s, where women were covered head from the neck downwards with bustles and corsets. In the 1930s, we had the Great Depression, and then we saw the hemlines lower again down to the floor in the 1930s. And then towards the end of the 40s, after World War II, we saw, when we were still in financial hardship from World War II, we saw the rise of the Dior New Look is what it's called. So it's that very typical Dior shape of that really kind of cinched in waist with the flared hips, really voluminous skirt that is all the way down to kind of the calf, down to the floor. And then in the 1960s, about 10 years after the war at this point, just a little bit longer, as the younger generation from the war were growing up, and we started coming into good, and we started experiencing good economic growth again, we saw the hemlines short all the way up into that very typical 60s Mary Quant style. And then in the 70s, we had multiple events that had a huge effect on the economy, including the Vietnam War and the embargo on oil. And then we saw the hemlines again shoot right back down into that hippie 70s style. And then into the 80s, when economic growth started to pick up, hemlines started to shorten again, which brings us really right up into the 90s and the 2000s with that Y2K style. I am reading notes, so I'm reading a quote, so I'm going to probably be looking down my notes. But the Fort Worth Star-Telegram even reported that if you see a guy in a three-piece suit staring out the window at female legs this autumn, don't jump to sexist conclusions. Maybe he's not a chauvinist pig after all. He could be diligently seeking clues to the financial future. So if we kind of look at all this kind of evidence, and throughout history how the hemlines have risen and fallen and risen and fallen, it's very easy to think that surely this has a standing, which is what I'm seeing a lot of people lean into. I'm seeing a lot of people at the moment quoting this Hemline Index theory as having some kind of standing, having, being based in facts, but that's actually not true. So whilst the George Taylor origin really does have some kind of small standing there, George Taylor didn't actually equate the skirt length to the economy. He actually wrote a PhD thesis in 1929 called Significant Post-War Changes in the Full-Fashioned Hosiery Industry. What actually happened is that the hosiery industry, so stockings, essentially silk stocking, companies had seen a massive rise in sales and had seen kind of a massive economic growth themselves. So he wrote a theory, he looked into it and he wanted to research how and why this had happened. And as part of his thesis, he had made one connection to the fact that the skirt length determined more economic growth for the hosiery industry, because shorter skirts typically meant that people were buying stockings and tights. But he never actually quoted that skirt length itself was indicative of where the economy was. But it was misquoted and it's kind of snowballed since. As I said, people quoting this all the time when it's not actually true. So the skirt length can be affected by multiple things, not just about where the economy is. Why they stood out to me so much was because my degree is actually in costume, which is a very period-based study. So skirt length and fashion shows in general are affected by multiple things. So first of all, this theory can only be researched as back as 1920, which as of 2025, that's only about 100 years worth of research there. Why? Because before 1920s, women weren't allowed to wear short skirts. Women always wore long skirts, typically with multiple layers underneath them that were, you know, very expensive, but always long. So we only actually have about 100 years of research. And when George himself conducted or wrote his thesis, it was the 1920s, and for the first time ever we were seeing shorter skirts. So George couldn't actually write a thesis about how skirt lengths changed because this was the first time that skirt lengths were having that really significant change. Which brings me on to the next point, is that up until pretty recently, when fast fashion really became prevalent, longer skirts would have actually been more expensive to construct compared to shorter skirts because they required more material, and material used to be quite expensive to buy. So the idea that shorter skirts is good for the economy, with the knowledge that longer skirts are more expensive to buy, surely you'd think it was the opposite way. Fashion also exists on a 20-year cycle, so every 20 years we see things kind of coming back into fashion. So recently we had the Y2K style kind of come back, reflecting on the early 2000s, which was 20 years ago, and you'll see kind of similar styles come up kind of again and again and again, constantly kind of reinventing itself but coming back in a similar way. You know, it's why we're still seeing things like corsets in style just kind of reinvented in different ways, because it exists on that 20 year cycle. We're always referencing 20 years ago. So this is why we, ever since the invention of short skirts, are going to constantly see this kind of flip-flopping between long skirts, short skirts, long skirts, short skirts, because we're constantly, there's no such thing as kind of an original idea. It's referencing 20 years ago. So it's going to continue in that cycle. There's also the argument that during financial hardships, people want to buy garments that are going to be able to be used for multiple occasions, not just for one use. You know, during good financial years, people will buy more things because they have more money to invest in more things. So they're going to buy, you know, more clothes and create a larger wardrobe because they can afford to have an outfit dedicated to just going to the bar. They can afford to have an outfit dedicated to going to work. They can afford to have an outfit that's dedicated to going to restaurants or to this place or that place or the other place. However, during financial hardships, people look for garments that they can get multiple uses out of, that they can wear to multiple events, to multiple places, an outfit that they can wear to work and then also wear out afterwards. So longer skirts are more likely to be more popular during financial hardships because you can wear a longer skirt to work and then dress it down to go out later. You can't wear a short skirt to work and then go out with it later. So people are going to go back to more kind of cleaner cut, more basic things that they can just kind of accessorize to go out in after work, to restaurants, to parties, wherever they're going. The political landscape also has a huge effect on fashion. If one of the examples that's often used in favour of the theory is the Dior New Look, and that during the whole idea being that after the war when we were in a financial hard time, Dior came out with his longer skirts, but you'll often see this referenced as if it was a really positive thing that a lot of women took to, when that's not actually the case. A lot of women hated the Dior New Look at the time, and whilst it's quite a popular look these days and it's probably one of Dior's most iconic looks, when it was first released women hated it. They were coming out of World War II. For the first time for a lot of these women, they had a little bit more freedom than what they were used to. Women were being allowed to work, women were being expected to do jobs that they'd never been allowed to do before. Doing these jobs meant that they were wearing trousers, which hadn't really been a popular thing before. Women typically wore skirts. Coming from the 30s, they wore longer skirts. The military uniform for women involved shorter skirts that were more of that kind of basic pencil skirt, or kind of that really basic, almost like an A-line shape that went typically just below the knee instead of all the way down to the floor. Women were kind of facing this freedom for the first time, being allowed to wear trousers and shorts and shorter skirts, and the idea of having to then squeeze themselves back into this really highly structured bodice with the really long voluminous skirt, they absolutely hated and did not want to go back to that. It actually sparked protests, and I believe even helped create a feminist group called the Little Below the Knee Club, which I'm going to do a little bit more research on. I'm really interested in that, so stick around for that video. What we also find is that fashion is quite an emotional thing, and how people are emotionally feeling about themselves and their self-identity has a huge effect on what clothes they wear. So during good economic years, people tend to have more money and feel a little bit more confident. Typically will buy clothes that they're able to afford, things that they wouldn't have been able to afford, such as their nails done, buying more expensive makeup products, going for skincare procedures, that kind of thing, and are more likely to purchase higher priced clothes that they feel more confident in. Overall, good economy usually equals more confidence in people, and if people are feeling more confident in themselves, confident in their body, they're more likely to wear shorter skirts. So where are we today in regards to the political culture? We are seeing a uprise in longer skirts. Is this because we're in a bad economic situation? Well, if you look at the political situation at the moment, we're seeing kind of the rise in fascism, the rise in Trumpism, we're seeing the rise online in clean girl aesthetics and the tried wife aesthetic, and due to that we are more likely to see the hemline lower down to the floor again, with the, as I said, with the popularisation of the tried wife and the modesty being kind of the current political landscape, that's naturally going to come. But I can almost guarantee in 20 years time those hemlines are going to go all the way back up again. Not because we'll be in a good, better economic situation, but because of all the details that I've listed before. I hope you enjoyed this video. The next video will probably be back to the Met Gala series, which I believe off the top of my head is around the 2010s where I'm at the moment, so stick around for that. If there's any videos you want to see or suggest, just comment them down below. You can follow me online on the Clock app and on the Photo app, that'll be down below as well. And do subscribe, it helps girl out, and I'll see you for the next one.